Hi there, you're listening to the Farming Today podcast. I'm Steffan Messenger. And today, after a spate of cyber attacks, just how nervous are the major food retailers about hackers?
Extremely nervous, I think it's fair to say. And it's not paranoia. The hackers really are trying to get them.
And we'll be visiting an historic plum orchard in Gloucestershire. But first, as we've reported on Farming Today, the last year has been an incredibly difficult one for growing cereal crops. But harvest 2025 is now just a memory, perhaps a bad one, and the cycle is beginning all over again. Some crops are already sown and the ground's being prepared for others. Duncan Farrington shared the progress on his Northamptonshire farm.
I'm a fourth generation farmer, and on our farm we grow wheat, we grow fava beans. This year we've tried spring oats, which have done very well, and we grow rapeseed. I was the first person in the UK to grow, press and bottle rapeseed oil on farm. We had a very dry August this year. We had 12 millimetres of rain in August, so that meant harvest went easily, and actually because of the low yields for harvest, we were finished in the first week of August, and we had this 12 millimetres of rain, but we didn't have that rain until the last 3 days of August, and we planted the rapeseed in the first couple of days of September so that it went into moist conditions. It's got off to a good start. We've planted it with a companion crop, which we always do. We use buckwheat, which grows very successfully.
What does the buckwheat do, Duncan?
Well, it grows really quickly in warm conditions. It dies off as soon as you start getting frost, but buckwheat's very good at scavenging for phosphate. Now, the trouble with the phosphate, it's locked up with the calcium in the soil, so it's not that readily available for plants to use. Very good at scavenging for that phosphate and getting hold of it. And then when the buckwheat dies in the frost, the phosphate it's scavenged is more available for the rapeseed in this case that is growing next to it. So what it's doing, it's providing a bit of cover against flea beetle, hopefully to confuse the flea beetles as they fly over the crop. It's adding in some organic matter because it's photosynthesizing and growing and building plant material. And then it's providing good nutritious phosphate for the rapeseed to take hold of as it grows through the season.
OK, so you've planted the rapeseed. What's left? What's next?
So next in the autumn is the wheat, and then the winter beans, and the oats. We're going to do oats again, but they are spring planted. But in the meantime, we will be starting planting the wheat. We're not in a hurry at the moment because the forecast is looking good, and I'm hoping for a kind autumn because we haven't had one of those for a few years. And we'll be starting planting the wheat in maybe the first or second week of October.
Duncan Farrington there. As of today, England has a new commissioner for tenant farming. The role was one of the key recommendations made by the Rock Review, which investigated the relationship between tenant farmers and landlords. The government's now announced that Alan Laidlaw will be that new commissioner. His new job description includes acting as an impartial point of contact for farmers and their landlords, ensuring fair practice and tackling poor behaviour. He'll also chair a farm tenancy forum. He's been speaking to Anna Hill, who suggested he may have his work cut out. 30% of respondents to a recent survey by the Tenant Farmers Association said they'd been harassed or bullied by their landlord.
There are a lot of challenges out there, and I think the code of practice, ultimately looking at there and reflecting, is what is happening here in line with the existing code of practice? And if it's not, that's something that we need to address. People will always have different commercial views on what needs to happen with a piece of land, but it's about how it's done. And I think that's one of the key things. It's about behaviour, it's about understanding, it's about knowing what good looks like for both sides. And I think my role is to make sure that we're convening constructive conversations amongst those, so where people feel that things aren't the way that they would like them to be, they've got a chance to remedy that, and then we see where we go from there.
Can you make sure that code of practice is constant throughout all agreements?
Landlord and tenant must be working in a way that works for everybody, if at all possible. They'll have different views on what that maybe looks like, but I think the code in particular is about how that is conducted. I don't see any reason why people shouldn't be using the code and looking at that and thinking, right, how do my objectives operated in line with the code deliver on behalf of me, and how do they impact on the other party? So, I think there's progress to be made, and I think, when I meet with the forum members on the 7th of October, that's a chance to find out where we think those challenges are.
Alan Laidlaw, the new Tenant Farming Commissioner for England. This week, farming today has been in the top fruit orchards of the UK among the apple, damson and plum trees. This morning, we're heading to Gloucestershire, where Vernon Harwood has been to meet a grower preserving historic varieties for the future.
So here's a green gauge. They're turning a nice sort of golden colour. They're on their way. Yeah, they come off with the stalks, but I'll separate those loose.
The plum harvest underway here at Halings Farm. This is an historic traditional fruit orchard in Gloucestershire on the edge of the Royal Forest of Dean and not very far from the banks of the River Severn. And in amongst his 1,600 trees, busy picking today, is fruit farmer Ben Swinley. What is an historic traditional orchard?
Well, a historic traditional orchard is where the trees are usually planted on quite large rootstocks, so they will grow to a 20-25 foot tree. They are also not sprayed. There's no spray, which is very important. My one was planted mainly for Blaisdon Reds, which is a local plum variety, and they're used for jam making.
And obviously standing here because the grass is long, the trees are very straight, we're surrounded by the hedgerows, not a commercial orchard in any way.
No, it's not a commercial orchard, but I do sell them commercially. I mean, I'll sell them to farm shops as well as doing a pick your own. This orchard's about 200 years old. I've got a tithe map which proves it was planted in 1841, but I think it's older than that. The Blaisdon Red came about in the 19th century, middle of the 19th century, and that really made a big difference because they used that as a base for strawberry jam, raspberry jam, because it had very high pectin content. They discovered it in a hedge in Blaisdon.
Now, Blaisdon is the next village, and we could almost walk there from here.
We could, easily. Yeah, I do, to the pub.
Yeah. And we're standing right next to the aforementioned Blaisdon Red.
Yes.
They're quite small.
They are this year.
They're not very colourful.
It's just because of the very hot summer. They've ripened earlier, and they haven't got enough rainfall to make them bigger. So unfortunately, they're going to be very small this year.
Now, you do grow the plums people will recognise from their supermarkets, so Victoria's and Zars.
Yes.
But I suppose it's fair to say that the unusual, the little known and the very local are the things that you're really passionate about. So Cambridge Gage, Denniston Superb, Damson Shropshire Prune, and Westbury River's Early Prolific, another fabulous name, Westbury on Severn.
Yeah.
I suppose that's the nearest local community of any size here.
It is, yeah, it is. Trouble is with the River's Early Prolific, everybody around here will vote it as the best tasting plum. But I sold some to a greengrocer in Colford using my slightly pressurised selling technique, saying they're wonderful, people will buy them. And they didn't. I sold her about 10 boxes. And the reason being that everybody wants big and purple for their plums now. Unless it's a Victoria, they recognise the name. So nobody knows what a River's Early Prolific is, and it's small and black, but it has got the best taste, but you can't sell them. And people make the mistake that when they see a plum, they rub the bloom off. And that's a mistake, because that's actually a wild yeast that is full of vitamin B, full of vitamins. So mine all have a nice bloom.
Ben, why are you so passionate about these very local varieties?
People always make the mistake that everything should be a dessert plum, when in actual fact plums were developed to have different purposes. So you have cooking plums, stewing plums, you have jam plums, bottling plums, and dessert plums. So I don't want them to die out, because who knows, in the future, their time may come again. They need to be appreciated.
And you can hear more about Ben Swinley's 200-year-old orchard in this Sunday's On Your Farm on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds at 6:35. As the fallout continues from cyber attacks on Jaguar Land Rover and nursery chain Kiddo in recent days, so too does scrutiny of the food supply chain and how vulnerable it may be to hackers. Major retailers like Co-op, Marks & Spencer's and Harrods have been targeted this year, costing them hundreds of millions of pounds and leading to empty shelves in shops. George Knott is the Grocer's technology editor. I asked him just how nervous supermarkets and their suppliers now are about cybersecurity.
Extremely nervous, I think it's fair to say. And it's not paranoia. The hackers really are trying to get them. The attacks we've seen this year, very high profile, Co-op, M&S, Harrods, just shows the disruption, the chaos these attacks can cause.
And why are food supply chains particularly vulnerable?
They work on very fine margins. Everything's just in time. Things arrive in huge quantities, move around the country. There's lots of suppliers involved. So a retailer might have a supplier, and that supplier has dozens of its own suppliers. They are making a sandwich, supplying a sandwich for the meal deal. That sandwich has lots of suppliers that supply the ingredients to it. So the supply chains are very far-reaching. They might be product come from overseas. There's lots of players, so there's lots of potential targets for hackers to sort of access systems and get in. The other part of it is all these systems between retailers, suppliers, their suppliers, their computer systems talk to each other and communicate and helps the whole thing operate. So when you get disruption in one part of it, it can have these huge knock-on effects.
So what are the retailers doing to protect themselves?
They've always been aware of cybersecurity. It's always been a business risk. I think certainly over the last year, it's sort of gone up in priority. Obviously, the big retailers have dedicated cybersecurity teams and sort of cybersecurity experts on the executive table. Because it's the access from hackers might come through a supplier, a lot of them now are urging their suppliers and setting standards for smaller suppliers, sort of cybersecurity, so they're not an access point to the bigger organisation. So there's a lot more sort of pressure and expectation from the big retailers on their suppliers for them to be secure as well.
I suppose there are implications there, impacts potentially at a farm level, because the industry is becoming increasingly digitised, the growth of smart farming and so on. This is something that farmers need to be concerned about.
The supply chain is increasingly digitally linked. All these systems talk to each other, and any sort of weak point, hackers can work their way up through systems until they reach the bigger target. The other element of this is the sort of social engineering side. So a lot of hackers will pose as an employee, pose as a supplier or a farmer, get in contact with the retailer or the business they work with, saying, oh, that system, I've forgot my password, I'm traveling, do you mind just emailing it over? Or what is it again? Can you tell me quickly? The IT manager might be keen to help quickly and pass it over. And these sort of social engineering attacks are definitely being taken more seriously by hackers. They're getting better at it.
Are there cost implications, presumably, for suppliers in terms of beefing up their cybersecurity?
Doesn't have to cost loads. There are sort of simple steps, lots of information out there on how to protect yourselves better, but it does take time and attention. There's also the insurance side of it. So companies are increasingly sort of insuring themselves against cyber attacks. Probably worth the cost because, the risks are big to your business if you have to turn off systems, if you lose a relationship with a big retailer, that sort of thing.
George Knott from The Grocer. And that's all we have time for this morning. I'm Steffan Messenger. The producer was Sarah Swadling. And Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.